I'm going to give some introductory remarks about the report that we produced, and then Leigh Talbot is going to talk about some of our financial findings. Because finances, of course, are a key part of whatever we do. How do we pay for whatever we want to do? It's different than what the city says. I just want to thank all the members of the Citizens for an Alternate Alexandria Waterfront Plan. It's not just Andrew Macdonald. It's a lot of citizens who've worked extremely hard over the last few months to come up with some alternative ideas, the vision, if you will, the framework for what we think is a better plan for Alexandria. And I'd like to thank all of them, because they are the ones that have really done all this work at no cost to taxpayers, but simply with a lot of hard work. And we've looked at a lot of different issues. And I guess the first, well, there's the group. I love this slide. Looking at the city's massing diagram, the models. And I guess the whole effort began last spring, you might say, when the Planning Commission approved, if you will, the draft small area plan. And citizens were quite upset. They felt that their ideas were not being taken seriously, and that the planning process itself was flawed. And what do I mean by flawed? Well, maybe the next slide would be good. There were lots and lots of meetings over a period of time beginning in 2009, where citizens, yes, had a chance, as Katie Kennedy will tell you, regale you with, had a chance to put dots on maps and do things. But it seemed as if there was sort of the discussion only went sort of so far. Certain ideas were sort of off the table. And one of them is sort of the elephant in the room, you might say, is commercialization of the waterfront, increased density, and revenue that would, in the city's plan, or at least in the city's vision of the waterfront, would pay for public benefits that we all want. Well, the problem with that is the community never really said, do they want all of this commercial development on the waterfront? And would it, in fact, do all the things that it was supposed to do? Would it really make the kind of waterfront that we all want and treasure? Would it bring value to Old Town and to our residential community and to tourism and so on? Would it protect the environment? Would it reduce or not create greater traffic problems? Would it match the scale and dimensions of the town? And so forth. Questions like that. And we felt very strongly that a lot of these questions have been sort of pushed aside because of the goal of development. The goal to increase development. And again, there's a lot of arcane zoning that goes on here going back to the 80s. Some of you who've been around for a while know that. But the city basically in the 90s, you might say, lowered the zoning. Developers didn't like it. Of course, they didn't like it. They didn't have the flexibility, or property owners. And the city said, hey, and this was going on while all of us were having this conversation over here in the back rooms, which we found through FOIA documents and so on. The city was talking with property owners. And they were saying, look, if you agree to let us put hotels on the waterfront, which we think are more welcoming than townhomes, we'll open up the waterfront, we'll give you more flexibility to do the things you want to do. Sounds like a great deal. You get the development, you get the revenue, and you pay for all the public amenities. The problem is the community, you and I, never had a chance to say, did we agree to that? Do we think that's a good idea? Do we think all the development makes sense, or does it not make sense? Next slide. We've been criticized at times for showing this 1970s rendition of the Checky development, or the Watergate project, on what is Founders Park. This was the precursor to what was a real change in the waterfront, from an old industrial sites to a more modern waterfront. And what essentially happened is you got someone sitting around and money got landing on, and the criticizers said, look, there is another use of this waterfront that is better, or will benefit Alexandria long term. We need to invest in it, we need to figure out how to do it. So what happened was they bought land, they traded land, they ended up with a wonderful waterfront park that revitalized the waterfront. They ended up with an art center which brought enormous number of visitors and revenue to the city coffers, and really been the heart of the waterfront development. One of the key developments, the side was built, and so on. Some of these development, I think we might say today, were a little too close to the water, but it was at least a much better than what had been proposed in the past. My point is this. The city is right back into this same argument. Let's have revenue, let's have development on the waterfront, and that development will give you the things you want. Well, we simply disagree that it is giving us what we want or is beneficial to Alexandrians. They looked across the river, I think, too much at places like National Harbor. And of course, the retort is, well, we're not planning anything like National Harbor. And that's true in terms of the total mass. But the philosophy is the same. And when they did this planning process, one of the things they were supposed to do was to look at other cities, other communities, look at other waterfronts. What did they do? As we've shown, they didn't really look at the ones that are most comparable to Alexandria. They looked at ones that really didn't give us the best view of what is a successful waterfront. We have looked at that in depth in our report and shown that one of the key things, and this is pretty common sense really, is the development of a shared community vision for the waterfront. And for whatever the reasons, and there are multiple, that never really happened in this particular case. So we went to hotels, and suddenly hotels became the great thing for the waterfront. Well, hotels don't privatize the waterfront, city officials said. I'm not sure how they get to this. Townhomes privatize it now, but hotels won't. So suddenly, if we build hotels on the waterfront, we'll revitalize it, make it more vibrant, more accessible to Alexandrians, and so on. But we argue that's not so fast. You put all this stuff down there on the waterfront in a tight space, you occupy land that could be parks and museums and other things. You haven't revitalized the waterfront, you congested it. Tony Cooper-Smith and others have looked very closely at the traffic issues and congestion, and they're very complicated issues, no doubt about it. But basically, it's a mess right now, and the city's plan sort of relies on things like valet parking, and the hopeful that private garages will suddenly become public ones, and so on. We haven't figured out how to deal with this problem at all. And it's true, even if you have museums and things, you have to deal with those issues. Open space. The plan claims that it's going to give us all sorts of new open space. What do we mean by that? It's giving us basically what we got in 1983 under the settlement agreements with the Robinson Terminal warehouses, which is little slivers of land along the edges and maybe the pier. And if you actually go and start counting up the numbers, it's not even 5 acres, it starts becoming streets are counted as part of the 5 acres, and so on. So we're not really opening up the waterfront, we're not really expanding public parks along the waterfront like Founders Park. We're not creating places where we can have great public places to bring people and residents and visitors to the waterfront. And I use this, and I do this with great respect for the people that live in Ford's Landing. They take care of their waterfront, they take care of their property, but this was sort of the 80s view. It was okay if we built really closely and we have these slivers of land. It was much better than the industrial development. But that's not what we need to do along this core 1 acre key bit of waterfront. Dina de Montigny and her husband, Joe Demscher, have done a lot of massing. They're architects and so on from planners. And these are just showing you sort of the increase in densities. They point out, if we develop the waterfront as the city would like to do, it's a 162% increase over what is there today, which is an enormous increase. It's not that much of an increase over what they call the 1992 zoning, but it's a large increase. That's Robinson Terminal North. And which, by the way, is the most historic point of land in all of Alexandria. It's where Alexandria got its start. Some of the earliest ships were built in Alexandria District. Robinson Terminal South will also become a mass of either hotels or townhomes. And I point this out, I say townhomes and hotels, because in fact, the way the city is now wants to rezone the waterfront, developers might build townhomes, they might build hotels, they can build anything they want. So we're accused of not wanting a plan. That's quite untrue. We want a plan, but we don't want the marketplace to be the plan. This is where they want to put a 122-room hotel on the car properties on where the art lady is now. Is this what history is going to be? Just signs and so on? People come to Alexandria because of history. It's the gold in the bank for so much of our economic engine and why you and I, all of us live here. Not all of it is pleasant, but it is fascinating history of early America. And Alexandria can tell that story. We're not National Harbor, and we need to develop a waterfront that does more of that. Plan says, well, we'll have design guidelines. We'll make a lot of the new buildings look like historic warehouses. That for us is not really an adequate response. I'm going to turn it over now for a bit of words from Leigh Talbot, who's going to talk about with one plausible alternative. We said that's not right. We want another alternative, and we want you to put it on the table. They only did it at the last minute in June, after the Planning Commission had approved the basic plan, and they gave us a $200 million Cadillac and said, here's your alternative. Of course it doesn't work. We disagree.
Everyone, and for the people who were at the Waterfront Plan Work Group meeting this morning, I apologize that this will be a review for you, but at least you'll have a chance to ask questions, which you didn't have the chance to today. My name is Leigh Talbot. I'm a volunteer with CAAWP. I'm also a chartered financial analyst. I've spent 17 years of my career doing financial analysis and research for the investment industry. So I not only care about the plan, but I wanted to really understand how it was feasible from a financial and economic standpoint. Fortunately, Tony Coopersmith started a financial model that was based off of the city's financial model, and we started working on it together and also doing some other research on the economic benefits of the CAAWP proposal. I'm not really sure that the city actually tried to factor in economic benefits into their own Arts and Parks plan. We've started doing that, and I think it actually could be further developed. So anyway, we started with the vision, as other great cities that have successfully developed their waterfront have done. They start with a vision, and then they look at the financial impact of the vision and whether it's feasible. What does this mean? The CAAWP proposal, we have determined, is actually going to be positive for the local economy. This is not minor change, as the acting city manager suggested. This is still substantial change relative to what exists on the waterfront today. It's just a lot less than what the city proposes because we strictly oppose changes in zoning that would allow hotels where they are currently not permitted. That said, CAAWP's proposals do help improve tourism revenues, and that's going to help our existing hotels. Let's look at hotels and their impact on the economy currently. The economics of hotels, additional hotels on the waterfront, are such that 450 new hotel rooms would increase Alexandria's hotel room supply, by 16%. What that means is if demand doesn't increase by a similar amount, then you're going to see average daily rates and revenues per available room at our existing hotels decline. How do you drive more tourists to the waterfront? I'll get to that in a minute, but you do it by providing more arts, parks, and cultural amenities. We need that in place of hotels. As you can see, after increases in supply in 2008 and 2009, this decline in ADRs and RevPARs actually occurred here. Slide, please.
What does ADR stand for?
Average daily rate. So, in our view, by eliminating hotels and additional hotels and providing increased cultural, historical, and parkland amenities for tourists, we could actually help our current hotels improve their occupancy rate from the current 70% level. They've got the capacity to take on more tourists. We also would note that that 16% increase in supply is actually far greater if you look at hotels that are outside of, say, the more distant Alexandria area. We question the rationale for including hotels, given that the Washington Post's own study determined, and this was conducted by an industry expert and it's been filed with the city, it determined that hotels were actually not financially viable, specifically at the two Robinson Terminal sites. You can find this in the public record on the city's website. Now, we understand that the Post originally, or the Robinson Terminal, originally intended to write this letter so that the city wouldn't require them to use hotels, but if an industry expert has already determined that the property would have no value if the hotel was there because it wasn't economically feasible, why are we including 450 more hotel rooms? Slide. The amount of historical and cultural amenities on the waterfront, we are going to provide more attractions for tourists. We've done some estimates based on industry data provided from an organization known as Americans for the Arts, which specifically looks at the financial and economic benefits of cultural centers that are related to the arts and history and so forth. We estimate, based on the way they calculate the multiplier effect, that we could potentially generate another $33 million in net new revenues for our community and roughly $800,000 in new city tax revenues. There's a reason for this, and I'd like to just cite some of these statistics here that are actually available on the ACBA website. The top tourist activities in Alexandria, these are tourists that come and spend money, are 32% visiting museums, 30% they want to visit historic sites. They want to visit, 16% of them want to visit art galleries. 12% want to see old homes and mansions. And yes, they do shop and dine while they're here. Slide, please. So, how does our plan look financially? I want to just mention and reiterate that what we've done is present 4 alternatives. They are a starting point for additional analysis. The city needs to do additional analysis. We've done as much as we can as a volunteer group, and frankly, we've done a lot. Our alternatives do involve the city acquiring parkland. We're going to get to why that's such a good opportunity in a moment from a financing perspective. A key innovative idea that is actually not fully endorsed by CAAWP, but that we are talking about actively, is the concept of potentially allowing the property owners to subdivide the parcel somehow. Maybe that's the city buying the parcel and reselling portions of it. Maybe it's dividing it up in advance. We've got to think that through. But this approach could actually benefit all of the stakeholders. Look at the property owners. They could potentially earn more from the sale of the properties because, as is often the case, the sum of the parts can be greater than the whole. The city would get increased tax revenues from a diverse set of developers and businesses. That's going to lower developer risk. Developer risk, by the way, is something that I think the city really needs to focus on. There's a lot we don't know about current developers that are interested in these properties. It's also the opportunity to acquire waterfront land for the public and keep it forever for future generations. Developers will benefit because they'll be able to acquire parkland lands next to protected park space. And it actually could open the door for more small businesses to get into those spaces. And finally, residents will have free access to the waterfront with less dense development in our historic and rather fragile communities. Slide, please. So in our research, we've identified multiple funding sources for the acquisition of waterfront land. And we believe this is an unprecedented investment opportunity for current and future generations. For the first time in generations, this land is going to be for sale, and it's an opportunity to acquire some or all, probably some, of this land to forever preserve it. The wonderful news is that right now interest rates are incredibly low, historically low. We have an opportunity to finance these purchases over the long term at rates possibly as low or lower than 3%. Similarly rated municipalities are issuing right now at 3% or less for medium to long-term municipal bond issues. The municipal bond market, which did struggle, has recently started to come back, and there's an article in the Wall Street Journal I encourage you to read. CAAAWP and others have also helped with researching grants that the city could pursue. We actually put together a database of about 39 such organizations that provide financing from the federal, state, and local level, also public-private partnerships and family foundations. These are all things that the city should explore to check on available funds. These are organizations that actually care about historic preservation, the environment, waterfronts, and preserving open space, amongst other initiatives. Slide, please. So there's a lot of numbers here. I won't go through everything. But what I would like to point out, and this again goes back to the fact that we are promoting a substantial amount of change, even though it's a lot less than the city. For modeling purposes, we included one small hotel here. That was really to demonstrate that the revenues from the hotels are going to be very inconsequential. And they can actually be offset by the revenues that are ultimately created by increased tourist activities on the waterfront. Note that we do include, for modeling purposes, the same amount of retail and restaurant revenue that the city's plan includes. I think that's very fair. And I think that should be acknowledged to the people that say that we don't want any change at all. As you'll see, we factor in revenues from a small hotel that will essentially cover the operating costs of the hotel, and also the additional revenues that we expect from increased tourism. You've got 4 different scenarios on possible costs. The first one, buy all land, takes the city's number of $97 million, and that includes acquisition of the land, demolition of structures, and rebuilding, all of the capital improvements. We offer other scenarios where the city could purchase individual parcels, Robinson Terminal North, Robinson Terminal South, maybe excluding the Robinson Terminal North at the west. You'll see those up at the top of the page. For now, we have listed the assessed values of the properties. I think it's fair to say that at least one of those properties has environmental remediation issues that are going to be very difficult for a developer to want to overpay for. We recognize that we could possibly adjust the assessed values, but when you look at the amount of work required, I doubt that they're going to be substantially higher than where they are now. In short, the different plans the different alternative scenarios that we've considered increase the amount that the city would have to spend relative to their plan by a far lower amount than the Arts and Parks plan that was presented by the city, the $200 million price tag. In our calculations, based on this modeling, we see that it could cost about $20 to $25 million, subject to how we adjust the assessed values more than the city's plan. We can finance that at extremely low rates and invest in the future. I'm going to give it back to Andrew.
I'll be very quick, because I know we need to get on to the next group. I think the point is this, that we feel very strongly the city never really looked at anything but one alternative. Not even an alternative. They looked at one idea, development as the goal to improving the waterfront. We think there's at least another very good idea out there that we've presented that needs to be explored. And we've asked the waterfront work group, and we've asked the city, we would like them to include our report and start really looking at it seriously. Compare fairly the costs and benefits of everything, not just, selective revenue over here against costs over here, but actually look at the thing. Look at the entire range of costs and benefits. This is a very unique opportunity. But really, it's a debate about the long-term future of our town. The waterfront is one of the most historic elements of it. What we do there will affect our quality of life for generations, forever. Thank you very much.